So thank you so much for coming to our session this morning. So Heidi gave us an unbelievably flattering intro this morning, so I don't think we need to spend loads of time on this slide, which is good because we've lost 7 minutes, so we can just kind of speed through all the kind of intros here. But I'm Sam Gibbs. I work currently for the Greater Manchester Education Trust, and obviously Alex, introduce yourself.
I mean, it seems like a little bit of that title there could cover all manner of things, couldn't it? My name's Alex. I am Director of Primary Learning for a trust across the north of England, but this year I'm on the secondment working for the EF and dipping my toe into a little bit of consultancy and kind of exploring some of the ideas we're going to talk about today across different schools and regions. So we're really excited to share with you some thoughts about our coaching curriculum, and for the next sort of half an hour or so do that really frustrating thing where we offer questions and provocations rather than solutions and things that we can maybe go away and concretely apply. But we're really excited to kind of be here and share our perspectives.
Yeah, so what brings us here today is that we're both really interested in and passionate about coaching as a lever for teacher professional development, but we just want to sort of recognise first of all that we don't hang our hat on any particular model or process or sort of way of coaching. There are kind of many ways to do it, there are sort of many flavours of coaching, but what we do know is that it is a really good bet for helping teachers to keep improving. We're less interested, as I say, in the models and the kind of process, and more interested today into how we can actually help and support teachers to become coaches in school contexts. And both of us in our current roles are really involved in doing that, thinking about how we can utilise coaching as a mechanism to help teachers to keep improving, and how we can do that at scale across trusts as well. So often when we talk about coaching, we focus, and quite rightly, on the teacher, on the person that is being coached, that is in that coaching process. What we're really thinking about today is the coach themselves, and what we'd like to offer up to you shortly, if the sound works, is a model of what we think is effective coaching. It's not school-based coaching, so sort of suspend your disbelief slightly, but we would invite you to really focus on the coach in this situation. And in particular, we'd like you to notice these things. So goal setting, the relationship between the coach and the coachee, anything you notice about modelling, and anything that you notice about feedback.
It's a lovely place to have frozen.
Look here in Chicago! How are you doing? You ready for your lesson?
Repeat the same note and then it moves on?
No, it just moves on, but it moves up so fast. Me, me, mama, mama, mama. Me, me, mama, mama, mama.
Me, me, mama, mama, mama.
Right. Me, me, mama, mama, mama. 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 Me, me, mama. Good job, sweetie. Get somebody, okay? How do you feel?
I feel good. Like, I didn't feel tension over
Okay,
here.
why'd you choose this song?
This is about Adele. She's going through a hard time and nobody really understands. So like, please go easy on me. I kind of connect with this song because at school I get a little, I'm not gonna lie, I get a little bullied.
I got a part for this. Who's been bullying my baby?
A lot of people out here think like bullying's the new cool. So they don't really know what I'm going through, but I always try to keep my head held high. I'm proud. I have no regrets, and I love who I am, and I love you!
I love you too!
There ain't no gold in this river that I'll be washing my hands in forever.
So each time you get that vibrato, baby, sounds good. I need you to exaggerate it. That I've been washing my hands in forever.
Bigger.
Yeah. Intonation here.
There ain't no gold in this river
Vibrato's on it.
that I'll be washing my hands in forever.
That's it.
I know there is hope.
Again.
Okay, I know there is hope.
Again, now you just have to make it cleaner when you get land on that head.
Got it. I know there is hope.
But since we want...
we'll just pause it there.
Let's give you a minute just to talk on your tables about what you noticed about those aspects that we asked you to focus on. So relationship, goal setting, modelling and feedback.
There's an adult and a younger person, so there's somebody with a lot of experience and somebody who's kind of working to try and gain that. There's no sense of superiority or so it's very much about equals. They're bringing something in particular, but they're not.
Okay, are we all right just to pause there? That's all right. Can we just take a couple of quick points of feedback, if that's okay? A couple of volunteers? Thanks, Sarah.
So I was really, I liked the contracting work at the beginning, because quite often when we think about that initial conversation of contracting, it can feel like somebody's setting up a culture, but actually it was a really nice opportunity for making moments of connection that then allowed them to establish a shared set of values that they could kind of underpin the session on, and there was a real kind of understanding of why she wanted to work on this bit of music in this case.
Yeah. Yes, that connection came through that reason and her sort of connection to the song, and she opened up.
Yeah.
Lovely, thanks Sarah. One more?
Can I just jump in there? We often sort of turn to the EF mechanisms, don't we? And part of that might be goal setting. And if we're not careful, that becomes that thing to tick off. What are your goals from this coaching conversation? Whereas here we've got goal setting, haven't we? But it's part of that kind of equal and caring relationship. And we're not suggesting you start calling your coaches baby and giving them hugs. But what comes across strongly, I think, is the respect, the mutual respect, and the joint kind of establishment of that kind of goal.
And the autonomy, right? So
yes.
It makes the person being coached, in this case, feel like she's got autonomy over what is happening in that setting.
Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Yeah, thanks Sarah. One more point? Anybody else?
We spoke about the instant feedback and the ability to put that into practice immediately rather than having to wait. There was that I do, we do, you do kind of relationship that was going on, so that the person being coached could have that immediate practice.
Yeah, quite right. And it was responsive, wasn't it, to what the young person was doing. It didn't feel like it was kind of pre-planned or sort of forced. So we've got somebody there, like Cheryl, who has got, a lot of things we talked about there were kind of really codified kind of bodies of knowledge about the domain, which is obviously singing, but also it's got those other kind of skills and abilities in terms of forming the relationship with that young person, getting her to open up, kind of bringing out the best in her. And sometimes we can maybe assume that sort of coaching experience can sort of happen magically, or that some people are just better at it, or they've got those kind of people skills, those sort of like more tacit skills. And I suppose if we think then about what that might look like in a school context, how can we take teachers, because it is almost always our teachers, isn't it, that are our coaches in schools, how can we take a teacher and everything they know about teaching and make them into a coach? Because it clearly involves so much more than just knowing about pedagogy and being an expert teacher. How do we support them and develop them to develop some of these other sort of softer skills, we might call them as well. So we're going to think then about the things that we might need to focus on to help us to develop coaches in schools, what we might call like the active ingredients, and thinking then about how we might work with coaches to develop those things over time. And we're going to explore the concept of what a programme of learning might look like for coaches in a real school context. We're calling that our coaching curriculum, because actually we think a lot of the principles of curriculum design and the way we think about curriculum as coherent and cohesive and on a sort of learning journey apply to the way that we might work with coaches as well. So this is the sort of thread of things that we're going to think about. So we're going to start with thinking about what makes a good coach, like what are those domains of knowledge, those skills, those attributes, those things that they bring to the table. What are we coaching on? And I guess the other question there is, why are we doing it? Not just because every other school seems to be. If you look on Twitter, that's not a good reason. What we're coaching on for. And then what does a professional development programme for coaches look like in schools? And we're going to share some examples with you of the work that we've done in our own school context on that.
So we'll start then with our first killer question. And I think the first thing that we might sort of share is if you go away and watch Cheryl Porter doing different kinds of coaching with different people, she also coaches kind of celebrity singers like Lauren Allred, who sang Never Enough. And she coaches in a very different way from her coaching with Isabella. So when we start to think about what makes a good coach, it can be really tempting to think just about the coaching process itself, the particular model that we're using. And of course, that might be a really important conversation to have within your leadership teams and with the coaches, so they understand that flexibly and can apply it with different types of people within that context. But when we're thinking then about trying to codify that and putting that into professional development, it's really, really difficult. And is it a right thing to even start to say, this is exactly what a really expert coach looks like and exactly what it looks like every time they go into a teacher's lesson and give some feedback? So our first killer question then, what makes a good coach? Sam and I thought about some of the research we've been engaging with, but also our own personal practical experiences of doing that within a live school environment and across our trusts, and some of the difficulties of kind of scaling that when you start to move beyond working with perhaps a deputy head in my own primary school to then thinking more broadly about what that looks like across a trust of 21 schools. And the place we arrived at from that reading and from our own practical experiences were kind of three broad themes or areas, which you can see on the slide here. And we're going to talk about some of them now. And you'll notice that we have separated them, but what we hope will become clear over the following slides is that really they are kind of jumbled up together. They're not neat categories that we can easily kind of distill down. And, you know, this idea of pedagogical knowledge, understanding of the art of teaching, of the representations that we can use to take our subjects live into our classroom, to make phase-specific models, all of that kind of content is tightly interwoven with that contextual understanding. So we see it as a kind of double helix with pedagogical knowledge and knowledge of context into being interwoven. And the people skills with that tentative question mark that are often assumed to be unlearnable, you know, you've just got it, you're a good people person. Actually, can we break those down and can we see those as the hydrogen bonds in that DNA strand that kind of link all of this together and make it work and make it translatable and help us to mobilise evidence-informed practice, for example, or school improvement. So just to give a very brief flavour of some of the thinking that Sam and I are doing around these different areas within our trusts. Let's start with pedagogical knowledge and a key piece of research. So tell me, who are these great thinkers? Anybody? Anybody know? Bananarama, yes, a great divider to see who was around when Bananarama was around. And their seminal quote, you know, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, that's what gets results. Well, actually, unfortunately, we disagree with these great scholars. It is what you do and the way that you do it. And, you know, a good thing implemented badly is going to fall flat, isn't it? But similarly, a bad thing implemented really, really well could also be quite dangerous for all sorts of different reasons. And we do have kind of resources, there's a kind of explosion of codified kind of tools which might help us to get really granular about what we think effective teaching is and what it might look like. And some of those are mandated. You know, we've got our ECF, we've got our suite of MPQs, we've got research-informed practices, which are a really helpful starting point. But certainly for me, listening to Sonia this morning, I think a crucial thing to have in mind when we're thinking about what pedagogies we want to equip our coaches to take into those coaching conversations are the pillars and the principles that underpin our teaching and learning practices and our policies, so that we think really carefully not just about the behaviour of implementing a tool like hinge questioning for a ticky listy kind of activity, but instead we equip our coaches with an understanding of the insights and the ingredients that make that a powerful strategy for a particular purpose and reason. So we're not producing kind of carbon copies, we're thinking about flexible adaptations and iterations of really strong practices that have an evidence warrant within our context as well as within the research literature. Just a kind of, and a slight embarrassment for me and Sam, because we're going to include some kind of quotations and pull quotes, and most of these are cited from Rachel's paper. Rachel's in the room with us today, about collaborative coaching practice. So this is Chris Munro, talking about context being everything. And of course, I don't think there's much more we need to say about this, in as much as we might have a fabulous coaching curriculum, but if we don't attend to the enabling and limiting factors within our school context and the culture, then some of that's going to fall flat, possibly all of it. But we also might really dive into what we mean by context there as well. So of course, we might automatically think about aspects of school culture, but what about the context of a particular coaching relationship or a particular department within that school where we're implementing coaching as a means to support professional development for key players? So thinking about the kind of microcosmic aspects of context as well as the bigger, broader picture, and paying particular attention to the enabling and limiting factors that might kind of create some hurdles for us when we start to train our coaches. And then lastly, how do we break down people skills? You know, some people perhaps feel that it comes naturally to them. For others, that might be something which feels more uncomfortable. And not all coaches will be able to facilitate the kind of relationship Cheryl had, and it might be unprofessional to attempt to do so within an educational context. But again, this really beautiful quote, again from Rachel's paper, I think is something which has got us thinking about, well, we might not be able to break down tacit people skills, but we might be able to start thinking about the particular behaviours or attributes or things that coaches can model to espouse those people skills, like paraphrasing, summarising, modelling, attentive, empathetic listening, and absolutely kind of featuring those and running those through the breadth of that coaching curriculum. So Sam, you want to talk about then, once we've thought about how we kind of train our coaches, what might need to feature on their professional development, what are they going to coach others on?
Yeah,
so
Alex has talked about the need for strong sort of pedagogical knowledge that coaches need to have, so kind of strong, robust mental models. So they've got strategies, they've got insights, they've got things that they can offer to teachers where appropriate, where relevant, and perhaps even where invited. But how do we define that content when we don't have consensus about what effective teaching looks like? There is no one right way to teach, there is no silver bullet, the same thing doesn't work everywhere. And actually the research into coaching is quite mixed in terms of impact, but where it does support the impact of coaching, it's where the content is well defined. So this is something that we need to think on. We think what's important is that whatever that how that knowledge is defined, is that it is defined and it is shared within a particular school context and broken down into strategies. And I'll share an example of what I've done in my trust kind of around this in a minute. But it's important to sort of say what we're not looking to do is to turn teachers into kind of carbon copies. It's not a case of like, take this, seminal book of 300 strategies and go and kind of implement them with fidelity, because like Rachel talked about in her session before, it's not realistic in kind of messy school settings and we're human beings, we're not robots. So we prefer to think more in terms of what we would call active ingredients. So the toothpaste, analogy here, the active ingredient of toothpaste is fluoride. If you take it away, there's lots of other ingredients in there, but if you take the fluoride out, it's no longer toothpaste because it's not doing the job it's supposed to do, which is to prevent tooth decay. So what therefore are those active ingredients? What are those kind of things that we want to sort of hinge coaching around? And we see the purpose of coaching as being to support teachers to develop adaptive expertise. So it's not here's 20 strategies, implement them. It's actually like here's some strategies, let's look at them together. Which ones are going to work in your context with your kids? Let's try it, let's rehearse it, have a go, let's go back, let's reflect, and that kind of that feedback loop. So, how then do we go about, in a real school context, with all the billions of other things that we have to do, creating that shared knowledge and that shared understanding and that shared language around teaching and learning? Now, we may or may not be in a position in our schools to draw on a pool of coaches who already have expert pedagogical knowledge. If we are, then great, we're lucky. But most of us don't, or we have a range of staff that might take on those roles. And we do need those clear models about what effective teaching looks like, kind of how we do things around here. And a solution for that, a possible approach to that I've been exploring in my trust is what Jim Knight would call a coaching playbook. So this idea that we can create together our shared knowledge, our shared pedagogy, our shared understanding of how we do things around here. So for me in my trust, this work has begun with defining 6 what we're calling our sort of pillars or our pedagogical principles, and they've been really chosen with our context in mind. So this example comes from one of my schools in East Manchester, where we serve a very socially and economically disadvantaged area. Some of the things that we're really sort of interested in improving are, for example, the sort of language deficits that we have. We have a lot of challenges around sort of behaviour management and classroom management. So, for example, language is power is one of our principles. Now that's quite abstract, that's quite nebulous. What does that look like in terms of defined pedagogical content? So we've started to develop, and again this is heavily drawing on Jim Knight's work around coaching, a kind of what does that look like if we break it down? Now there is the how, so there's a kind of if this was to be enacted, what steps might that involve? But more importantly for us is the why we're doing it. If coaching is about supporting teachers to adaptive expertise, it's not about just giving them a how and go off and do it. It's in coaching, let's explore together why we're doing this. Is it right for the kids in front of you? Might we adapt it? Let's have a go at that. And then really importantly, fronting up some potential lethal mutations of this. So to really kind of encourage through supporting teachers to apply these ideas through coaching, that critical thinking. Where could this go wrong? What would it look like if it went right, but what actually could it look like if it goes wrong? So we see then this idea, where we ask the question, what are we coaching on? The content of coaching as being a combination of these things. So there is the need to have the shared pedagogical knowledge, the evidence and the strategies that we're kind of hanging our hat on. But coming to that as well is the knowledge, and I loved Sonia's use of this morning, this idea of the backpack. You know, what is the backpack that the teacher is bringing to that coaching conversation? Their knowledge, their experience, and their values, and then of course the school context that you're working in. So bringing kind of all these things together, we can start then to see more clearly why we are coaching and what it's for, but most importantly what we are coaching on and why we're doing it in this particular context. So Alex is going to talk now about how we might address some of these ideas around what makes a good coach and the purpose and the content of coaching in terms of what that might look like for coaches and how we might develop them.
Thank you, Sam. I think looking at the time, what I might do actually is open this up to you as an opportunity to reflect on some of what we've discussed up to this point in the presentation. So, dipping our toes into what an enabling culture might look like, dipping our toes into what some of the kind of domains of knowledge or particular mechanisms of a coaching curriculum might be. What's your freshest thinking about this in relation to your roles? Coaching might be something that's very well established in your schools and you might have kind of lots of key takeaways already to share, or it might be something that you're just embarking on as a BD journey. So we'll pause just for 2 minutes, talk on your tables. My only question is, what's your thinking about these aspects of the culture around coaching and what we actually help our coaches to understand? Okay, 2 minutes please, if that's okay.
What was the question? Sorry, thinking about like what so yeah, it is actually. I was just getting drawn into that because that's really my next step. The pillars. So I think when I arrived, the situation was kind of that they had coaching at school, but their, when I say they, you know, the people who were there before, their beliefs and philosophy on coaching were very different to mine. It was a very bureaucratic coach.
Yes.
And I disagree with that totally. For me, it's about enabling people, you know, and delivering research. It's not because you can't, because you want to be the best. So first of all, it was about looking at that. So with a group of people and really looking at coaching. So I started the journey with looking at different research into coaching and getting a real understanding of what my vision for coaching was and why I had it. So they understood what career purpose and connecting that with research. So we then came up with our own definition of what it meant to coach within our academy. Use that then as a springboard to start training. We've got a team of like lead practitioners and teachers coaching so we use sports fabrics and ABC do it. Something that I'm really passionate about. And then so I've spent a long time training with my coaches on that method and then breaking each one down.
You just take 30 more seconds, alright?
And then it's an external coach who's a friend of mine who's not in the school to work with them because I feel we can't do all the work.
Anything you want to draw out from the conversation?
I mean, we're really up against the clock here, but does anyone have a burning kind of key takeaway there that they think is really crucial in relation to their own experiences of this in their role? If I may, I might just kind of share the big word over here, which was time. And, you know, it goes without saying that we're all, you know, I hate using the word time poor because it's quite provocative, but it's not about who's got the time to do this, it's about who's got the time to make this their priority, and that's a really difficult question. And we've had conversations about how this is quite different in primary to secondary. In my last role as acting head of a primary school, one form entry, the only person who really had the time and capacity was my vice principal. But there was a certain association with that person going in and coaching teachers because of her positional authority. And that question around time and the practicalities then started to influence some of these other questions around enabling cultures and collaborative learning and dialogue. So it's a question, I think, that isn't just about the nuts and bolts, it absolutely relates to these kind of big questions, these big killer questions.
I mean, in my schools within my trust, I'm really lucky in that leaders have made decisions to prioritise coaching conversations, and in each of the schools we've got now a team of coaches who have been given time to work with them. So as a typical example, in each school a coach would receive an hour a week to work with a teacher and an additional hour for their own professional development, and I've been really lucky that I've been able to work closely on developing that programme of learning for them. So a big consideration for me in that, don't be distracted by the enormous quote, actually to read it quite yet. At the moment, it's been researching myself and trying to learn more about how coaches learn. And I used a little team of my coaches for my own sort of case study that I did for my master's degree last year. There's very little research, actually. Rachel might correct me and point me to like a whole load of things that I just missed. Hopefully she will. But it was pretty, what I found was sort of pretty thin on the ground. But I came across this really interesting paper by Galusi, I don't know whether I pronounced that right, et al. And what they did a case study of a coach and kind of followed him over a year in a school. And there's a few interesting things. We can share these slides afterwards if anybody's interested in these researchers and what they found. A few things sort of came out from this, really. The interesting thing for me was how the coach's own learning was intrinsically tied to that of the teacher. So as Dan, this coach, improved in his own teaching through all the other things going on in school and that alignment, his coaching improved as well, and it was kind of this reciprocal relationship. And that's been a sort of big learning point for me, that as I coach a teacher, whatever their experience, I learn as much from that, as I hope that they do from me. that was a really interesting idea. And then this idea of conceptual understanding, that over time, Dan got to a point where he was almost like he was going to other schools, sort of CPD sessions and other things, and he was taking off his teacher hat and putting on his coach hat, and he was starting to see things through the eyes of a coach. So going to, say, a CPD session on, you know, questioning, and thinking not, oh, how can I use this with my year 9s next Friday, but I could really kind of think about ways to represent that with my coachee when I work with them to support them in achieving their goals next week. So for me, there's some kind of learning points here and sort of implications about how we work with coaches, you know, that they're not, as the hypodermic needle theory would suggest, sort of recipients, thank you, of knowledge that we just kind of inject into them, and they're not a kind of blank slate, but they're bringing knowledge and understanding sort of to this process. The coachees are already, and that relationship, that learning relationship is reciprocal. In terms of what that's looked like from us, just to give you some concrete examples of how we've implemented that in our own settings, this has looked quite different really for Alex and I. So I've talked already about the ways that I've worked to kind of codify teaching and learning in my context. The key thing for me has been this. It's been that the coaching model we've developed is a responsive coaching model. School improvement, you know, it's a journey, isn't it? It's something that's static, and therefore if coaching is going to serve that school improvement journey effectively and meaningfully, it too should evolve and be responsive. So we've done a lot of work around that and what that might look like. Alex, do you want to just say what?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see on kind of my slide there that we have done some work around finalising a coaching model that was suitable for use at scale across quite a large trust. But I'd say that most of my work here has been as part of the anti-Bananarama Brigade. Like, there was a lot of focus on the systems and the processes of coaching. Coaching is the thing we're implementing. And when we first started this journey, far less developed thinking around what we're coaching on, what we want our teachers to have within their arsenal of tools to support them in their practice and to help them refine their art and their craft. So much of the work that we've been doing at Northern Education Trust is to think about that question. What do we want our coaches to be supporting the implementation of? Is it wider curriculum? Is it our reading strategy? Is it kind of general approaches to teaching and learning? How does this dovetail into our early career support? And getting really specific and tight on those frameworks and codifying them, but creating models which show those flexible iterations for different phases or subject areas. And so we've still got a bit of a journey in terms of the final killer question. We've got quite tight on what we're coaching on. The real question now for us as a trust family is to then start to really explore some of those PD approaches to support that ongoing development you've just described, Sam.
So we probably haven't offered you, simple answers to these big questions because there aren't any. But I guess what we'd like to leave you with is the idea that these are questions we should be continually asking ourselves when we utilise coaching in schools to help teachers, to support teachers, to keep improving. And we've run 2 minutes over, and it's lunchtime, so we definitely absolutely have to stop now. If there are any questions, don't forget you have to. If there are any questions people want to ask, please feel free to ask them or to stay behind and speak to us afterwards, but I'm sure you'll be wanting to run off to your lunch. But thank you so much for giving your time to come to our session today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.